My mother-in-law slid a piece of paper across the kitchen table and said, "We need you to sign this by Friday." The paper was a personal guarantee form. It had my name already typed in. The debt was $94,000. I looked at my husband. He was looking at his coffee cup. I asked what the $94,000 was for. She said it was a business loan taken against Hargrove Family Ventures, the company she and my father-in-law had been running for 6 years. She said the company had hit a rough patch. She said, "Family takes care of family." She said it the way people say things when they have already decided the answer is yes, and are just waiting for you to figure that out. I did not sign. I said I needed to see the business financials first. She looked at me the way she had been looking at me for 9 years of marriage, which was the look of a woman who had been tolerating my presence and was running low on patience for it. She said, "This is not an audit, Lauren. This is family." I said, "I'm a forensic accountant. I audit things. That's what I do." 3 weeks later I had the records. And the company they wanted me to guarantee was not a rough patch. It was not even a real company. That is where this story starts. My name is Lauren Hargrove. I am 46 years old and I have worked in financial fraud examination for 19 years, based in Nashville, Tennessee. I work primarily on business fraud, fake invoices, shell companies, inflated expenses, fictitious vendors. I specialize in the kind of fraud that happens inside small and mid-sized businesses, where the person running the scheme has enough control over the records to believe they are untraceable. They are never untraceable. The records always exist somewhere. Sometimes they are in a bank's transaction history. Sometimes they are in a state filing database available to any member of the public. Sometimes they are in a loan application that a lender stores for 7 years. The records exist. You just have to know which ones to ask for and how to read what they say. I have spent nearly 2 decades finding the gap between what a business claims to be and what the records show it actually is. My husband is David Hargrove. We have been married for 9 years. He is a good man in most of the ways that count, and a conflict-avoidant man in the specific way that made everything I am about to tell you possible. He does not like confrontation, or he has always believed his family operated in good faith. He is the kind of person who returns to a restaurant once a week for 20 years because the food is reliable, and he does not want to find something new. I knew this about him when I married him. I accepted it as a feature, not a problem, until it became a problem. His parents are Gerald and Norma Hargrove. Gerald is 68 and spent 30 years in insurance sales before he retired. He was good at it, by all accounts. He knew how to talk to people. He knew how to make a pitch sound reasonable. He knew how to frame a request so that the person receiving it felt like the right answer was the helpful one. Norma is 65 and spent 30 years managing Gerald, the household, and the impression their family made in Brentwood, a suburb of Nashville, where they purchased a large house in 2009 and have been refinancing it periodically ever since. That last detail is one I noted during my investigation. It is relevant. From the beginning of my marriage, I was evaluated against a standard I was not told about and did not meet. I worked too much. I did not attend enough family dinners. I asked too many questions about things that were apparently not my business to ask about. At David's parents' anniversary party in year 2 of our marriage, I asked Gerald what kind of clients Hargrove Family Ventures was working with. He changed the subject so quickly that I almost missed it. Almost. Norma had a particular phrase she used when she disagreed with something I said or did. That's a very practical way to look at it. She said it the way you say something when you mean the opposite. David's sister Kristen was the one who met the standard. She showed up to every dinner, she asked no questions. She smiled when Norma talked, and laughed when Gerald told his stories, and never once asked to see a balance sheet. I watched the family dynamic for 9 years, and I kept my opinions to myself. I had grown up in a family that valued being capable and not complaining, and I had applied that to my marriage too. I did my job. I paid my share. I showed up to the dinners I could make. I did not score points for the ones I missed. And I did not complain about the scoring system. I was not there to judge how they operated. I was there because I loved my husband. Then the paper came across the table, and they needed my signature on it. And for the first time in 9 years, they wanted me to do something that required me to trust them completely. And trusting them completely meant not looking at the records. I have never not looked at the records. Hargrove Family Ventures LLC was registered in Tennessee. That was the first thing I checked, the night after the kitchen table conversation, after David had gone to bed and I was sitting in my office at 11 o'clock with my laptop. The registration was real. The company had been formed 7 years ago. Gerald Hargrove was listed as the registered agent. The address was their home address in Brentwood, Brissing. I pulled the Tennessee Secretary of State's business records and went through every annual report filed since formation. Annual reports had been filed every year without gaps, which meant someone had been paying attention to the maintenance. The most recent filing listed Gerald as the sole member. There were no other officers, no additional members, no changes in structure over 7 years. A company that never adds staff and never changes its filing structure over 7 years is either a one-person operation running quietly and well, or it is a shell that exists primarily on paper. The difference shows up when you look for the operational evidence. I searched for any public-facing presence for the company. No website, no LinkedIn page, no business listings in Yelp, Google, or any industry directory. No reviews. No contract records in any public database I could access. No press releases, no client announcements, no trade association memberships. For a 6-year-old company claiming $400,000 in annual consulting revenue, that absence was significant. Real consulting businesses leave traces. Clients mention their vendors. Vendors list their clients. Invoices get referenced in procurement records. Even a small operation that works entirely through personal relationships leaves a digital footprint somewhere. This one had nothing. I wrote that down. Not a conclusion, a question. But a question with weight. The next morning I called my attorney, a woman named Deborah Walsh, who handles civil and family financial matters in Nashville, and who I had worked with twice before on unrelated cases. I told her about the personal guarantee request and asked what signing it would mean. She said, "Board, if the company defaults, you are personally liable for the full $94,000. Your personal assets, including any jointly held property, are exposed." I said, "What if the company is not generating revenue?" She said, "Then the default risk is very high, and you should not sign anything without seeing the financials." I said, "They won't give me the financials voluntarily." She said, "Then don't sign. And if they push, I'll send a letter." I told David that night that I was not signing until I saw the company records. He said he understood. He said he would talk to his parents. He talked to them. It did not go well. Norma called me the next day. She did not begin with a greeting. She said, "David tells me you're refusing to help." I said I needed to see the financials before signing a personal guarantee for $94,000. She said, "We have never asked you for anything." That was not accurate. In 9 years of marriage, my in-laws had borrowed money from David twice, totaling $31,000, which had not been repaid. The first time was a home repair emergency. The second time Gerald described as a bridge loan while a business deal closed, and the deal never closed, and neither did the loan. David had also covered a car repair bill for Gerald in 2019. I had not raised any of those things. I paid attention to them the way I pay attention to everything financial, but I had no standing to demand repayment of money David had chosen to give. This was different. This required my signature, my personal liability, my name on a legal obligation. Nobody was going to put my name on something without my understanding of what it was. I said, "I'm not refusing to help. I'm asking to see what I'm being asked to guarantee." She said, "After everything this family has done for you." I said, "What specifically has this family done for me?" Silence. Long enough that I wondered if she had put the phone down. Then she said, "We welcomed you." I said, "I'll look at the financials as soon as they're available." She hung up. Brew, if you have ever been told that asking a reasonable question made you a bad family member, comment below. Tell me what you did. Because what I did next was what I always do. David got calls from his mother every morning for the next week. His sister Kristen sent him a long text saying I was making the family feel attacked. Gerald sent a 2-line email saying he was disappointed in me. Nobody sent me the financials. I decided to find them myself. Deborah's letter bought me time, but it did not get me the documents I needed. Gerald could ignore a letter from my attorney indefinitely, and Norma was already framing my request as an attack on the family, rather than a reasonable ask, from someone being asked to sign a legal obligation. So I started with what I could find without their cooperation. A personal guarantee for a business loan means the lender has a file. The lender filed a UCC financing statement when the loan was originated, which is a public record. I searched the Tennessee Secretary of State's UCC database for Hargrove Family Ventures LLC. There was one filing. The lender was a company called Meridian Capital Partners. The filing was dated 14 months ago. The collateral listed was business equipment and accounts receivable. I searched for Meridian Capital Partners. It was a private lending firm based in Georgia that specialized in small business loans. It had a website, a phone number, and reviews that were mixed. I called them. I identified myself as a forensic accountant retained in connection with a personal guarantee request related to their loan to Hargrove Family Ventures LLC, account holder Gerald Hargrove, Port. The representative confirmed the loan existed. She confirmed the outstanding balance was $94,200. She said she could not release account details without authorization from the borrower. I asked whether the company had made any payments on the loan in the past 6 months. She paused. A long enough pause that I counted it, 3 full seconds before she said she could not comment on account status. That pause told me what I needed to know. A lender who cannot comment on payment status is almost always protecting information about a delinquency. They cannot say the loan is current because it is not. They cannot confirm a default without the borrower's authorization. So they say nothing, and the silence is the answer. I noted the pause in my file. Then I sent Deborah a request to formally obtain the loan file and payment history through a civil litigation hold notice. This was not a hostile action. It was a standard document preservation request that any party potentially named in a civil matter can make. Deborah sent the letter that afternoon. Meridian responded within a week. Their letter was 3 paragraphs. The first confirmed the loan account. The second stated that the account had entered default status 4 months prior, with no payment received since month 10 of a 36-month repayment term. The third noted that the lender had been in discussions with the borrower regarding remediation options, when the borrower had proposed adding a personal guarantor to the loan. I read that third paragraph twice. Gerald had gone to the lender with my name before he had asked me. He had offered me as the solution before I knew there was a problem. The lender had agreed to pause collection proceedings while he arranged the guarantee. That was the window I had been brought into, not the beginning of a conversation about helping the business, but the end of one about who was going to absorb the default. He was not asking me to help a struggling business. He was asking me to assume responsibility for a debt that was already 4 months in default, so that the lender would have a solvent party to pursue when the collection clock restarted. I printed the Meridian response letter first. I put it in the folder. That was the first document. There were more. Deborah's litigation hold request also triggered a broader document production. Meridian provided us with the original loan application, which Gerald had submitted 14 months ago. The loan application included 2 years of business financials for Hargrove Family Ventures LLC, a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet for each year. I spent an evening going through them with a cup of coffee that went cold before I was halfway done. The financials showed a company with annual revenue of $340,000 in year 1 and $410,000 in year 2. The revenue was categorized as consulting and advisory services. The expenses included payroll, office costs, travel, and professional services. The net income was modest but positive in both years. On the surface, it looked like a small but functioning consulting business. The kind of thing a retired insurance executive might start to stay active. The numbers were not large enough to seem suspicious. They were exactly the size of a business you would believe in without looking closely. That was probably the point. I started with the revenue $340,000 in consulting and advisory services in year 1. I wrote that number on my legal pad. Then, I wrote the questions next to it. Who were the clients? Where are the invoices? What services were delivered and to whom? A consulting business has clients. Clients receive invoices. Invoices show up in the business bank account when they are paid. The paper trail of a real consulting operation is dense and specific. You can follow the money from a client's account to an invoice number to a deposit. The chain is verifiable. I went to the bank records to find the chain $340,000 in consulting and advisory services in year 1. From a company with no website, no LinkedIn, no business listings, and no public clients. That was possible. Many small consulting firms operate through personal relationships and do not maintain a public presence, but the revenue had to come from somewhere. Consulting revenue means clients. Clients mean invoices. Invoices mean a paper trail. I requested the company's bank records through Deborah's civil filing. It took 3 weeks and a court order because Gerald objected. The judge granted the request. The records arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I went through them that night. The company's bank account showed 2 years of deposits. They totaled, across both years, approximately $127,000. Not $340,000, not $410,000. The financials submitted to Meridian for the loan application showed $750,000 in combined revenue across 2 years. The actual deposits in the company's bank account totaled $127,000. The financial statements given to the lender were false. I went back through the deposits looking for the source. Most of them were transfers from a personal account. Gerald's personal checking account had been transferring money into the business account at irregular intervals, and the business financials had been recording those transfers as revenue. He had not been running a consulting business generating $400,000 a year. He had been cycling his own money through a business account and presenting it as operating revenue to qualify for a loan. That is loan application fraud. I called Deborah at 8 in the morning. Deborah said, "You need to be certain before we take this further. Loan application fraud is a federal matter if the lender is FDIC affiliated or if interstate wire transfers were involved." I said, "Meridian is a Georgia-based lender and Gerald is in Tennessee. The loan application was submitted electronically. That's wire communication across state lines," she said. "Then this is potentially federal territory. I need you to document every piece of this in writing before we make any representations." She also said, "Lauren, understand what you have here. If this holds up, you did not just find a family financial mess. You found evidence that your father-in-law submitted fraudulent documents to a lender to obtain $94,000. That is a serious matter. I need you to be thorough," I said. "I am always thorough," she said. "I know. I'm saying it out loud so it's on record." I spent the next 4 days building the file. I worked at my desk every evening after David went to sleep. Not because I was hiding anything from him, but because I needed to do this the way I do everything financial, alone quietly, without running commentary. I needed the numbers to talk to me before I talked to anyone else about them. I created a comparison document. The financial statements submitted to Meridian on one side, the actual bank deposit records on the other. The format was simple. Left column, what the loan application claimed. Right column, what the bank records showed. Bottom row, the gap. Year 1 showed claimed revenue of $340,000 against actual deposits of $62,000. The gap, $278,000 in claimed consulting revenue with no corresponding client deposits. Year 2 showed claimed revenue of $410,000 against actual deposits of $65,000. The gap, $345,000, combined across 2 years, $623,000 in claimed revenue that did not exist in the bank records. I printed the comparison document and read it twice. The numbers were not ambiguous. There was no version of this that was an accounting error or a categorization difference. The money was either there in the bank or it was not. It was not. I thought about the loan application process. Someone had submitted those financials to a lender. The lender had reviewed them and approved a $94,200 loan based on what appeared to be a viable consulting business. The lender had been deceived, and now the person who had deceived them wanted me to become personally liable for the loan when it defaulted. I put the comparison document in a folder. I clipped it with a red binder clip. Then I called Deborah. I traced the source of every deposit in the bank records. 81% were transfers from Gerald's personal checking account. The remaining 19% were deposits from 3 sources I could not immediately identify from the account numbers alone. I requested those source accounts through Deborah's civil filing. 2 of them were savings accounts in Norma's name. The third was an account in Kristen's name. I sat with that third one for a moment, Kristen's account. She had been sitting across from me at family dinners for 9 years. In the love seat by the window, arms crossed, performing the role of the good daughter-in-law while I was cast as the difficult one. She had sent David a long text saying I was making the family feel attacked. She had also contributed money to her father's business account that was then classified as consulting revenue on a loan application. She knew. Whether she knew the full picture or only her piece of it, she had put money in that account, and she had not told anyone. Norma and Kristen had both contributed funds to the business account that were then recorded as consulting revenue. This was not a family business in rough waters. This was a constructed financial fiction designed to obtain a loan. 3 people had participated in building it. One of them had then sat across a kitchen table and asked me to personally guarantee it. If you have ever discovered that someone you were expected to trust had been building a lie one layer at a time, you know what it feels like to sit with that information before you do anything with it. You are not ready to act yet. You are still absorbing the shape of it. I absorbed it for 2 days. Then I called David. I did not tell David everything on the phone. I asked him to come home early and sit down with me. He came home at 4 in the afternoon. He sat at the kitchen table. I put the comparison document in front of him. He read it quietly. He went through it twice. He said, "Where did you get this?" I said, "The bank records came through the civil filing." The loan application came from Meridian. "The comparison is mine." He said, "You filed legal proceedings against my parents." I said, "I filed a document production request to protect myself from signing a personal guarantee on a fraudulent loan." "That is not the same thing." He said, "Lauren." I said, "David, the financial statements your father submitted to get this loan were false. He submitted $750,000 in revenue that does not exist. The actual deposits were $127,000, most of which came from personal accounts, including your mother's and your sister's." He stared at the document. I said, "He asked me to personally guarantee a loan that he obtained with fabricated financials. If I had signed that guarantee, I would be legally responsible for $94,000 in debt on a loan that should never have been issued." David put his hand over his face. I said, "I am not trying to prosecute your parents. I am trying to tell you what I found so you understand why I did not sign." He said, "What happens now?" I said, "That depends on what they do next." David called his father the following morning. I was not in the room. He came back an hour later looking like someone who had been handed information he would spend years processing. He said, "Dad says the financials were prepared by an accountant and he trusted what was submitted." I said, "What accountant?" He said, "He won't say." I said, "The transfers from personal accounts being recorded as revenue is not an accountant error. That is a structural decision in how the financials were built. No accountant would classify a personal transfer as consulting revenue without being told to." He said, "He wants to meet the whole family. He wants to sit down and work this out." I said, "What does working it out mean?" He said, "He wants you to withdraw the document request and sign the guarantee." I said, "No." He looked at me. I said, "I am not withdrawing the document request and I am not signing a guarantee on a fraudulent loan. I will meet with them, but I will not be going there to agree to something." He nodded. He called his father back. The meeting was at Gerald and Tansharma's house on a Saturday afternoon. David and I drove together. He did not say much in the car. At one point, about 15 minutes from their house, he said, "Whatever happens in there, I need you to know I'm not going to ask you to sign anything." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have said that 3 weeks ago when they first asked." I said, "Yes, that was it." We drove the rest of the way in quiet. Gerald and Norma were in the living room when we arrived. Norma had put out coffee and a plate of cookies, which I understood immediately as a staging choice. The domestic warmth of the house was meant to be part of the conversation. We were in a family home, not a conference room. The implicit message was that this should be handled accordingly. Kristen was there too, which I had not expected. She sat on the love seat near the window with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone who had been told this was an ambush before it started. I noted that Kristen was in the room. I noted that she said nothing when we came in. I noted that her account had been one of the 3 feeding revenue into the business that had never existed. None of that came up until later, Gerald began. He said the business had gone through a difficult period. He said the loan had been taken in good faith. He said the financials had been prepared by a professional, and he had signed what was put in front of him. I let him finish. Then I opened the folder on the coffee table. I said, "These are the financial statements submitted to Meridian Capital Partners for the loan application." I laid them on the table. "These are the bank deposit records for Hargrove Family Ventures for the same 2-year period." I laid those next to them. The statements show $750,000 in consulting revenue. The bank records show $127,000 in deposits, 81% of which are transfers from personal accounts. The consulting revenue on the statements does not exist, Gerald said. That's not what the accountant told me. I said, Gerald, personal transfers from your checking account were recorded as consulting income. That is not an accountant misclassifying an expense. That is a deliberate construction, Norma said. You are accusing my husband of fraud in his own home, I said. I am showing you the records and telling you what they show. What you call it is up to you, Kristen said. You've always hated this family. I looked at her for a moment, I said. I spent 19 years learning to read financial records. I read these ones. You can be angry at me for what I found, but you cannot change what the documents say. Gerald rubbed his jaw with 2 fingers. He looked at David. David said, Dad, I need you to be honest with me right now. Did you know the revenue numbers were not real? Gerald did not answer immediately. That was the answer, he said. I was going to pay it back. Once the business picked up, the business had never existed in the way the statements described it. There was nothing to pick up, Norma said. We are family. You are supposed to help us. I said, I will not sign a personal guarantee on a loan obtained with false financial statements. That is the only thing I am refusing to do. I closed the folder. I picked it up, Gerald said. If you go to the lender with this, it will destroy us. I looked at him. I thought about the anniversary party and the way he had changed the subject when I asked about his clients. I thought about the kitchen table and the personal guarantee form with my name already typed in. I thought about the paper cookies and the staging of the domestic warmth and how all of it had been arranged to make me feel like the difficult one for asking. I said, I haven't decided what to do with it. But I am not signing, and I am not withdrawing the document request. Norma said, You are doing this on purpose, I said. I am not doing anything except declining to sign a legal obligation I cannot verify and showing you the records I found when I tried to verify it. She looked at Kristen. Kristen did not look back at her. That was the only moment in that room that surprised me. Kristen not looking back at her mother. The one person in the room who knew exactly what her own account activity had contributed to the company's false revenue, sitting with her arms crossed and her eyes on the carpet. We left. In the car on the way home, David said, He knew. I said, Yes. He said the whole thing was fake. I said the company exists on paper. The loan is real. The financials used to get the loan were constructed. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What do you need to do? I said, I need to protect us. I need to make sure our names are not attached to that loan in any way. And I need to document what I found in case the lender or anyone else ever asks. He said, And my parents? I said, That's between them and Meridian. I'm not reporting anything tonight. But if the lender contacts me directly or if a guarantee demand comes, I will have to respond honestly. He nodded. I drove the rest of the way home. Deborah sent a formal letter to Meridian on the following Monday. The letter notified them that Lauren Hargrove had been solicited to sign a personal guarantee on loan account ending in a specific number and had declined following an independent review of the company's financial records. The letter stated that the review had identified material discrepancies between the financial statements submitted with the original loan application and the actual bank deposit records for the company during the same period. The letter included a copy of my comparison document as an exhibit. Deborah told me afterward that including the comparison document was a judgment call. It made the letter harder to ignore, but it also meant the information was formally in Meridian's hands. I said to send it. I was not interested in protecting Gerald from information about his own loan. Meridian's response arrived 8 days later. They confirmed receipt, noted they were conducting their own review, and stated that no guarantee from Lauren Hargrove would be sought or accepted in connection with this account going forward. That sentence was what I had needed. My name was off the loan. Whatever happened next was between Gerald and the lender. 3 weeks after the response letter, Meridian initiated collection proceedings against Gerald Hargrove personally, citing the personal guarantee he himself had signed at origination. They also notified him that they had referred the loan application discrepancy to their fraud department. Gerald called David that evening. David told me about the call in 3 sentences. He said his father was upset. He said his father used the word betrayal. He said he did not respond to it. If you have ever done the right thing and been told by someone you love that you betrayed them for doing it, you know what those 3 sentences caused David to say out loud. Subscribe if you understand what that kind of honesty in a marriage actually requires. These stories are for people who choose the truth even when the family makes it expensive. World called David 4 times. In the 2 days after the Meridian letter arrived, David answered the first 2 calls and let the last 2 go to voicemail. He told me afterward that his father had cycled through several positions in those 2 calls. First was anger. The second was injury, the particular tone of a parent who believes a child has betrayed them by not shielding them from the consequences of their own actions. David did not yield to either. Norma sent me a text that said, "I hope you are proud of yourself." I read it and set my phone face down on the desk and went back to the work I had been doing. I was in the middle of a client audit. I had deadlines. I was not going to spend the afternoon composing a response to a message designed to make me feel guilty for reading financial records. I did not respond. Kristen called David, not me, ring, and said she wanted him to understand that she had not known the financials were wrong. She said she had moved money into the business account because her father had told her it was an investment and that it would be returned when the business caught up. Flowed. She said she had not seen the loan application. She said she had not known. David told her he understood, but that he could not speak to what the federal review would conclude about her account activity. She did not call back after that. Prue. The loan was Gerald's problem from the day he signed the application with numbers that were not true. My refusal to sign the guarantee had not created his exposure. It had simply declined to absorb it. The $31, Fruzine, that David had given his parents in 2 separate loans over the years of our marriage was never repaid. We did not pursue it. Some debts you write off because the cost of collecting them is greater than the amount. What I wanted back was not money, fraud. It was the 9 years of being told I asked too many questions and worked too hard and did not belong enough, by people who were asking me to put my name on a fraud. The fraud department referral from Meridian was eventually reviewed by federal authorities because of the interstate wire component. I received a call from an investigator about 4 months after the Meridian letter, free. He was straightforward and did not tell me more than he needed to. He asked me to provide my comparison document, the bank records I had obtained through Deborah's civil filing, and a written summary of how each document had been obtained and from what source. I sent everything through Deborah. It took me 2 evenings to organize the package, every document labeled, every source noted, every figure tied to a specific bank statement or filing record. The same way I organize everything, the same way I would organize a file for any client. I do not know the full outcome of that review. Federal financial fraud investigations take time, and the parties involved are notified of outcomes I am not a party to. What I know is that my document was part of the record, that it was complete, and that it was accurate. Whatever followed from it was built on something solid. Gerald's personal guarantee on the original loan made him liable for the $94,200. Meridian pursued collection through a civil judgment filed in Tennessee. Gerald's attorney negotiated a settlement for a reduced amount, the terms of which I was not made privy to and did not seek out. What I know is that the settlement required the liquidation of certain personal assets, and that the large house in Brentwood that they had been refinancing since 2009 was listed and sold within 8 months of the Meridian judgment. I found out about the house sale through David, who found out through a family friend who had seen the listing. He mentioned it to me quietly one evening, and I said I was sorry, because I was. Not for what I had done, for the distance between where they had been and where they ended up. That distance was not my construction, but I was part of the chain of events that made it visible, and I do not pretend otherwise. I do not know which assets were sold beyond the house. I have not asked. That chapter is in a file I do not reopen. Hargrove, Family Ventures LLC was administratively dissolved 8 months after the meeting in the living room. The dissolution filing is public record in Tennessee. The company that had never really operated stopped pretending to exist. There was no winding down, no final client invoice, no goodbye from a staff that had never worked there. The dissolution was filed online, in a form that took less time to complete than it had taken Gerald to route personal transfers through the account and call them consulting revenue. I pulled the dissolution filing the day it went public. I looked at it for a minute, then I printed it and put it in the folder with the comparison document. David and I are still married. That surprised some people who knew the outline of what had happened And it did not surprise the people who knew us well, for the marriage was not threatened by what his parents had done. It was tested by whether we could be honest with each other about it, and we were. We talked about it at length over several weeks. Not in one big conversation, but in pieces, for the way you process something that has multiple layers, the financial layer, the family loyalty layer, the 9 years of dinners where I had been evaluated and found wanting. The two of us each carrying a different understanding of what his family was and arriving, eventually, at one that was shared. What we arrived at was this: his parents had done something wrong, and he had not known, and when the evidence was in front of him, he had not defended it. That mattered. Not that he had a perfect family, that he did not look the other way when he found out they didn't. His relationship with his parents is different now. He still talks to them, Frotter. The conversations are shorter. He does not bring me up and they do not ask. Kristen has not spoken to me since that Saturday afternoon. Have you ever been in a family where the price of belonging was agreeing to things you knew were wrong? Drop a comment and tell me how you handled it, or how you wished you had. The comparison document I built that week is still in a folder in my filing cabinet. 8 pages. The claimed revenue on one side, the actual deposits on the other, the gap labeled clearly at the bottom of each year. I have a red binder clip holding it together. I use a red binder clip on files that are closed but significant. Files I need to be able to find if someone asks. Nobody has asked yet. But the file is there. My work has always been about the gap between what something claims to be and what the records show it actually is. I have found that gap in insurance claims, in business valuations, in estate accountings, in payroll files, board. I have found it in places where the person running the fraud was a stranger, and in places where they were not. This time the gap was in my own family's business, and the stakes were my own name on a legal document. I did not expose Gerald to prosecute him. I exposed the records because they were true and I was being asked to assume responsibility for a debt built on a lie. There was no version of that I was going to sign. Not for $94,000. Not for $9,000. Worse. Not for any amount. The records said what they said. They were going to keep saying it whether I signed anything or not. I just made sure the right people could read them. Norma said this was not an audit. It was family. She was that it was family. Fert, she was wrong that family means you stop reading. If this story reminded you to look at a bank statement, a business filing, a loan document, or a family request that never quite added up, subscribe. Every lie leaves a paper trail. Every time. She called it family. I called it a $94,000 fraud. The records agreed with me.